My name is Steve, and I am one of the founders of the Smoking Standard podcast and the Smoking Standard Instagram page.
Who or what introduced you to cigars?
So, my introduction to cigars was actually through the military, and I was stationed at Fort Irwin, and I was working in a staff position at the time, and our battalion commander was a big racquetball player. So every day at 3 o'clock, we'd go play racquetball, and he would literally beat me every time. He would make me hold his feet so he could do 50 sit-ups between every game that we played. But he himself was into cigars, and he would host for the staff at the battalion level cigar nights over at his house, just as a camaraderie team building thing. And all I really knew about cigars at that time, and we're talking back in 1999, 2000 time frame, was that it was something that was special, and he was using the cigars as a way to collect everybody and have a commonality at this function he was hosting at his house. So I went over there. That wasn't the first cigar I ever had, but that was the first time where I started to understand and develop opinion on what cigars can be used for, and that is kind of where my interest started sparked to smoke cigars on a more regular basis, because I saw how it could bring a group of people together and really, made the gathering more special and brought me into a group that I normally would not be in on a day-to-day basis.
When did cigars shift from hobby to passion or business?
For the hobby portion of that, I think that goes back to, as a beginner, you really smoke cigars very occasionally. I would say borderline randomly, unless you really have somebody, a mentor, if you will, a cigar mentor, that is, you're smoking with them, they're teaching you about it, and it becomes a routine. It really wasn't a routine for me up until 5 or 6 years ago, when I'd already been retired. We were coming out of COVID, and I moved up to Taylor's, South Carolina, from the Citadel, where I'd graduated from my veterans program down there. I got involved in a cigar club. The individual that hosted, he lived in a private golfing community. So I would go up there, smoke cigars with those guys every Saturday. So now the routine started to come in. That's when I really started understanding that cigars were something that are, you share them, you talk about them. We did a lot of talking about the cigar blends, where we smoked them, all the different stories behind what these men were doing when they were smoking these cigars. And that's really where I started to get into, that became a passion now, because I'm like, okay, I love a good story. I think a lot of your best relationships are built through storytelling, and cigars is a great vessel for that. So again, about 5 or 6 years ago, it became my passion. So then I started ordering cigars. I got a desktop humidor for my office at my house. And then I was, in between Saturdays, I was smoking, maybe 1, 2, 3 cigars. And then I started reading about it. I started understanding what blends were. I started understanding, you know, again, what cigars tasted like between the different manufacturers and the blends that resonated with me. And then once I got involved in that, it was just full steam ahead. Like next thing you know, I already bought cigars and I outgrew my desktop humidor. Now I needed another humidor, and it just went from there. To the business point of that question, which is kind of what this is now, for me, because of my passion. And now I have several hundred cigars in my humidors. And I've been going to cigar lounges. And whenever I travel, I go find a cigar lounge to have a cigar at. The more I learned about the cigar community and what it really is about, and all of the different people and the stories and behind the cigars that we smoke, is there's a story behind those blends. There's a story behind those companies and those manufacturers. I really had the desire to contribute to that community in the best way that I had access for me, which was kind of the teaser to what you're seeing now. I started a cigar company. Sentinel Cigars originally was the name of the company. Then I got with a couple other gentlemen, Tim and Zach. We decided to put together this podcast idea. So then we started that little piece of the company. We also started developing merch. So we have that piece of the company, which is the Smoking Standard, which is what is on Instagram now, where I'm starting to interact with, people and develop those relationships through social media. I'm really just learning it on the fly as I go. I'm not tech savvy, but I found two people that were, in Tim and Zach, and they're teaching me, and I'm teaching them about cigars, and we're just kind of feeding off of each other's energy and the vessel that is the cigar, and developing our relationships deeper. We're learning how to run this company, and trying to decide the vision and the direction we want it to go. So that's kind of how it's evolved from my hobby to then it became a passion of mine. Now we've started a business with it. And along the way, I've also dug into becoming a CCST through Tobacconist University. That has even deepened more of my passion, because now I can go really nerdy on it, and I can get into soil and water and growing regions, and why do they produce the plants that they produce, and the flavor profiles from those plants, and how does that become a blend. And I've just gone down that whole path, and there's really, I'm only going to be going down it further and longer, and I'm just committed to learning everything I can, smoking everything I can, and just really enjoying the stories and the relationships that I'm building along the way. Now that we've decided to make this a business.
So that goes into our next question. What does terroir play in tobacco flavor?
So as I was talking before, I kind of have a scientific brain. I'm just kind of wired that way. For me, learning about the regions of the world, the countries where tobacco is grown, and then I've went down the rabbit hole of studying, excuse me, soil mineral contents, water mineral contents. How does that play into the uh, the flavor profiles that are going to ultimately be blended with those plants? I think it plays a huge role. Now that I know more about it, you know, in my opinion, it all starts with, terroir. It all starts with the environment that these plants are grown in. Um, and I think that that's really what makes tobacco and blending a cigar and the ultimate product that we all end up smoking that's what really gets my motor running for now choosing a cigar, interacting and trying to engage with manufacturers. And I think that's kind of what is really cool about the boutique space, because you have really easy access to a manufacturer in the boutique space. I think that plays a huge role for me personally now in what cigars am I picking. And again, being a CCST, I smoke everything, although I have my favorite blends that are, you know, that give me, really what my palate is geared towards. But once you know everything about where these cigars are grown and how these flavor profiles come together from the terrain and the environment, I think it makes it very easy to pick up any blend of a cigar and you can enjoy that and have a great smoking experience.
What's your go-to pairing and why? And do you approach that scientifically or emotionally?
So, go-to pairing, coffee and my cigar. I think coffee is, well, and even whiskey. If you think about whiskey, how whiskey is made, okay? And again, coffee and whiskey both have the same conceptual process. They're grown in an environment. That environment affects the flavor profiles through the coffee beans and then the roasting and then how, through your brewing process. Same thing with whiskey. When I was working at a distillery, you know, what type of corn are you growing? Where was that corn grown? The barley, the malt, the water, and then the distillation process. So all of that plays into those flavor profiles. So my go-to pairing on a daily basis, because I start smoking cigars sometimes at 7 o'clock in the morning, is going to be coffee. Later on in the day, if I want to pair with a spirit, my go-to pairing from the spirit side is going to be scotches more so than bourbons. I think it's real easy to get bourbons that overpower a cigar blend. You have to remember the disclaimer for cigars in general is taste is personal. My palate is not the same as anybody else's palate. There could be some similarities, but when I start pairing stuff, it's going to be based on what my palate likes. From the scientific to emotional side, it's a little bit of both. If I really want to get nerdy again and I really want to work on my pairing and I'm going through my bar and I'm pulling out stuff and I'm trying to be like, going through the blend and the blend of the whiskey and things of that nature, you know, what it boils down to for me is what do I want to be the main event of that experience for that pairing? So if I want the cigar to be the main event, then I'm going to go with a lower proof spirit, a whiskey or a scotch. And again, rum, tequila. I love sipping tequila with cigars. I think a very organically distilled, grown, and aged tequila goes very well with cigar blends. So if I want to go emotional, then it's just going to be what mood am I in? Honestly, I'm going to pick the cigar based on my mood. I'm going to pick the whiskey based on my mood, and I'm going to smoke them and I'm going to drink them. Does one, you know, are they truly compatible? Maybe not, but that's not the point. The point is my emotion drove that. And if I'm in a mood I'm a high proofer anyway. So, and I'm also a rye guy. So chances are that's going to be what I went with. And the cigar that I smoke is going to just be what I want to smoke the cigar. And, um, and if they play well together, great. If they don't, well, then there's also something to be said for pairing something in a contrast. That is a pairing in and of itself as well. If I want to get scientific about it, I will. If I'm going to be emotional about it, I will. Honestly, I think there's a very fine line between those two anyway. So
What cigar would you recommend for someone celebrating a major life win?
I'm going to go back to what I said in the answer to my previous question. If you are having whatever this event is in your life that you're celebrating, then you should smoke whatever cigar you feel is going to elevate that experience. And taste is personal. Smoke what you like. I really am not of the methodology, if you will, where I have to bring in some high-end, high-powered cigar to enhance or elevate the experience, the event that I'm either attending myself, or it's my event in my life. I'm going to absolutely pick what I think is going to have the taste and the flavor that's going to bring me the enjoyment. And quite honestly, that cigar is probably going to be one that I am very familiar with, the story of the manufacturer, the story of the blend. What did the manufacturer, what was it, the event in their life that they created the blend of this cigar? That's probably how I'm going to pair it with the event in my life that I'm celebrating. Or if I am gifting some cigars to somebody that's having an event that I was invited to, I am definitely going to go with a cigar that I can tell them a very great story and get them very, emotionally wrapped around that cigar blend based on the story of that blend. I think that's the best way to, pair a cigar with a celebratory event that is either one of your own personal season, or you're gifting a cigar to somebody else for their event in their life.
How do cigars build relationships differently than other social settings?
The cigar is the great unifier. I think that it has the ability to do that very thing in a social setting. What's the most typical social setting we can identify with cigars? Cigar lounges. I've gone into cigar lounges and I have met renowned authors, poets. I have met people that knew nothing about cigars, and through their conversation with me, they were able to enjoy that experience better, and I just got to meet somebody else in the world and bring something to their life that day. Unfortunately, we have the cigar smokers that it's all about what's on the band, and it's a flex move, and that's fine. If that's what motivates them to smoke those cigars, cool. Ultimately, for me, I think that a cigar has the ability to level out anybody holding it in a social setting, and instead of isolating people, it brings people together in whatever that setting may be.
If you could smoke one cigar with one person, who would it be?
Man, one cigar with one person. I honestly, for this purpose of this question, somebody in the cigar industry. When you look at how we get a cigar in our hand, somebody had to take a risk. They had to start from, again, the well-renowned stories of Padron and selling cigars out of the trunk of his car. You've got the Fuente story, which is one of resilience, and all of the manufacturers that came from Cuba and fled during that time. I think those stories of starting from absolutely nothing with an idea and just a drive to create a legacy for their family over the centuries, I think it's just absolutely fascinating. If I was to smoke a cigar with somebody not in the cigar industry, I think I would probably would want to smoke a cigar with Grant. I mean, he literally was the president of our country. Backwards from that, he led the Union Army in the Civil War, and he, oh, by the way, he smoked cigars. Literally, you could trace cigar smoking back through the history of our country. First of all, where was he getting his cigars at that point in time? That'd probably be one person that I'd love to smoke a cigar with, and just and talk to him about his experiences and coming through, obviously, the trials and tribulations of leading the military, at that time in our country's history. Again, you know, what kind of cigars was he smoking? Where did he get his cigars from?
If your brand had a code, what would its core principles be?
So, core principles of the brand. And since my company is branded as a cigar company or in the cigar community, you know, one of the codes that Tim and Zach and I talk about with this project is authenticity. We talk about credibility. We talk about masculinity. You know, we try to get 1% better every day. And I think that as a cigar brand, I think that plays into it very well. We also personally talk about, you know, bringing demographics that smoke cigars out of the shadows. The younger generation, women smokers, I think that they're highly underrepresented and they need to come out way more. And I love the movement that the women have going in the cigar culture right now. I have two sons that are both in the military. They ask me about cigars. They smoke cigar every now and again. It's not really their thing right now, but the curiosity's there. You know, fidelity amongst cigar smokers. Again, there's no real reason for anything in the cigar community to be, you know, hidden or divisive. I think if you're going to continue to use the word culture and community, then we all have to come together. It's although there is competition in the marketplace, I don't really think there needs to be competition in the promotional space, if that makes any sense.
What advice would you give someone starting their cigar journey?
Starting the cigar journey, you know, that's a topic that I see all the time on podcasts, one that I'm sure that we're going to entertain on our podcast. I think the biggest thing for beginning smokers is that you really have to understand what is a cigar. I think everybody jumps to flavor profiles and they want, you know, because again, you want to have a great experience. But I don't necessarily think that it's uncommon for a beginner cigar smoker that is either smoking the very first cigar ever, or maybe it's the 10th cigar they've ever smoked over the span of, you know, 5 years or whatever, however long it takes them to really get into it. The first thing you have to understand is you're literally lighting something on fire and putting it in your mouth. Like that takes a little bit of adjusting to really understand why this is going to be a good thing at some point and it's going to taste really amazing. So you have to kind of prepare the beginner smoker for that, I think. The other thing is also don't stick a Toro in a beginner smoker's hand. They're not going to stick with it for 90 minutes. And if they do, it may not be the best experience they've ever had at that point in time, regardless of the blend you put in their hand. Because again, at the end of the day, you lit something on fire and you put it in your mouth. Okay. So once you get the beginner to understand this is going to take a little bit of time for you to really adapt to, and you kind of have to stick with it through some of the, you know, the bitter campfire thing going on, you know, across your palate to really start to understand the nuances of a cigar. Then I think you can get into the flavor profile piece. I would also offer, again, a lot of the beginners that I come into contact to, that some of them are, you know, and again, don't let beginner be the word that automatically takes you to this is a 18-year-old or an early 20s individual. I've had 50, 60, 70-year-old men that really just kind of played with it. They never really got into it. But I get the same question asked, how do I pick a cigar though? Okay. I would offer, if you don't really have a huge palate awareness, then I would go back to, okay, what's my favorite meal? Like what's on my plate? Why do I like that? I would also offer that choosing a cigar in general appeals to our senses: smell, taste, feel, visual acuity. You know, is the beginner smoker. Like I said, you're not going to hand them a 60 ring gauge Toro right off the rip. It's a big cigar. It's big in their mouth. It's something that the smoke is big. Like all of it is going to be big and it's up in your face. So I would say start with something, a very small ring gauge cigar with a very mild flavor profile. And let's get used to that first. Let's get used to the heat. Let's get used to the smokes in your face. Let's get used to the aroma. Let's get used to what it tastes on your palate because you lit a bunch of leaves on fire and you stuck it in your mouth. Let's learn why that's okay. And then let's get on to, okay, let's talk about the terroir. Let's talk about where the plant was grown, and let's get into, again, the science piece of it. Now, there's also the group of people that are beginning smokers that don't care about any of that. They just want to do what the group is doing, and that's awesome. Keep an eye on that person, though, because chances are they weren't prepared for that experience, which goes into that point, beginner smoker. Always have something on your stomach. If you're going to smoke a cigar and you're not smoking regularly to where your body and your palate has adjusted to, what you like, how your body is going to react to the cigar, always approach any cigar smoking experience you're about to have on a full stomach and be sure that you're prepared to smoke that cigar. As you become a more experienced smoker, by all means. I smoke cigars at 7 o'clock in the morning with cup of coffee and an empty stomach. I'm fine. I've been doing it for over a decade. So, and I smoke 2 to 3 cigars a day typically. My body's adjusted to that. So you kind of have to work your way into it, So that's the best advice I would give a beginner smoker is 1, always have a full stomach. Number 2, let's get you to understand what exactly it is you're doing by lighting something on fire and sticking it in your mouth. That may not be the most pleasant thing right off the bat. But if you're really committed to it and you want to keep doing it, then as we get into the style of cigar and the blend you're going to smoke, always going to be mild. It's always going to be something that is a smaller ring gauge and a shorter vitola. So that way you're not taking a beginning smoker and you're locking them into an hour, an hour and 20, an hour 30-minute experience because they're not going to be that committed to it over time. And by the time they get to the end of that cigar, if they smoked it all, they're probably going to be ready to put it down and be like, I'm done with this thing.